we here for? Here at this place, the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Statesboro? So far, in this series, we've examined the following purposes for our presence in a place like this. This is a place for community. This is a place to respond to the injustices of the world. A place to celebrate who we are with a special focus on gender and sexuality. And today, we're examining how this should be a place to honor both life and death. Every Unitarian Universalist congregation has its own ways of celebrating and marking life's transitions. We share our joys and concerns. We support each other through difficulty and success. From birth to death, our UU congregations help us live with deeper gratitude, greater connection, and more reverence for life. We honor and celebrate rites of passage here, including our baby and child blessing ceremonies. We have bridging ceremonies when our young folks move from youth to adulthood. We have wedding ceremonies, and of course, we have memorial services. Unitarian Universalists have great memorial services, don't we? We do. Now, that's not an encouragement that we have any in the near future. But when our time comes, we all know that it will be well done. So we come here to honor and celebrate life and all of its ups and downs and transitions. But today, as we approach that time of year when many religions and cultures honor the dead, I want to focus a little more on how we deal with death, because that's a little harder since none of us have personally been there. We may have been close, and I know that there are those in this congregation who've been on the very verge of death, and we may have been death adjacent in that our very close loved ones have died, but none of us has been pronounced dead, I don't think, so far. So who are we to talk about it? And more specifically, who am I to talk about it? Well, I'm your minister. And I think it's important to explore and think about that one transition that every single one of us will share. No one is exempt. We all will die. Now, it's not something that we necessarily focus on unless we're required to do so. That occurred to me back when I was in seminary at Meadville Lombard. In one of the very first classes I took, I received the assignment to write my obituary. I don't know if any of you have tried to do that, write your obituary, but it was an assignment. I had to do it. I considered the alternatives of my possible death. Jane Page dies in motorcycle accident attempting to jump beautiful Eagle Creek. That's back when I actually had a motorcycle at that time of my life. Or Jane Page dies of rare tropical disease after valiant efforts to help save the rainforests. Or perhaps Jane Page shot by angry homophobic white supremacists. That one's probably more likely. In the end, since I could just make this up, I decided to have a long, full life ministering and serving others in Southeast Georgia, enjoying travel, music, and theater, and even teaching dancing late in life at the local Unitarian Universalist church. I optimistically dated my death in the year 2056. Well, you know, they're coming up. Yeah, I was born in 1950. It's possible, folks. The year 2056, and indicated that I died under hospice care, surrounded by friends, family, and my faithful canine companion. It was a fascinating assignment to think about the conditions of one's own death And I find it interesting that given that choice, I would choose to have what some might consider a rather run-of-the-mill death rather than something more glamorous and exciting. And it's interesting that I would choose to die gently under hospice care without all those invasive procedures that tend to keep one alive for no good reason. And with drugs, please, rather than perhaps, having a good deal of pain. It's interesting that I would choose that kind of death rather than going out without knowing what hit me. Which brings me to one of Rick Maston's poems. It's entitled, Poor Devil. In my early 20s, I went along with Dylan Thomas, boasting that I wanted to go out not gently, but raging, shaking my fist, staring death down. However, this daring statement was somewhat revised when in my 40s I realized that death does the staring and I do the down. So I began hoping it would happen to me like it happened to the Sentry in all those John Wayne Fort Apache movies, found dead in the morning, face down with an arrow in the back. Poor devil, the sergeant always said, never knew what hit him. At that time, I liked that, the ending taking me completely by surprise, the bravado left in the hands of a hard-drinking Welshman still wet behind the ears, older and wiser now, though, over 70, and with a terminal disease. The only thing right about what that sergeant said was the poor devil part. Poor devil never used an opening to tell loved ones he loved them, never seized the opportunity to give praise for the sunrise or drink in a sunset, moment after moment passing him by while he marched through his life staring ahead, believing in tomorrow, poor devil. How much fuller, richer, and pleasing life becomes when you are lucky enough to see the arrow coming. And indeed, UU minister and poet Rick Maston did see the arrow with that terminal disease, and he did take those marvelous opportunities. Well, we don't have to be pronounced with a terminal disease, folks, because guess what? The arrow is coming. Maybe today. Maybe in 2056. But it's coming. Reverend Forrest Church was another UU minister who thought he didn't have long for this world when he began working on his book, Love and Death. Now, I've quoted him and drawn information from him before, from his inspirational writings, but I had to struggle a bit today before I shared using his work. You see, since the Me Too phenomenon, many women UU ministers have said and declared that they will no longer use the materials of Forrest Church. You see, after misconducting in 1990 by having an affair with a member of his congregation and breaking up 2 families while a minister at All Souls in New York, his congregation did vote to keep him, and he received only a slap on the wrist from UUA and UUMA. I don't believe that light slap on the wrist thing would happen today. But it did, and Forrest continued his work and his writing. Now, he did quit his drinking and his philandering and seemed perhaps to be a little more humble about it all in the end. His words that he has written down continue to inspire me. Perhaps because I see this differently from my fellow women ministers, because I've been the wife of a charismatic man who had the same kind of philandering problem, and then in the 90s fell in love with his graduate assistant, ending not only our own marriage, but that of a family with 2 young children. Yet, when I run into his former students and they share with me what a difference he made in their lives, and indeed he was a great teacher, I honor that good work with them and lift him up. I have forgiven him, and I do honor all of the good things that he has done in his life. Because, heck, we are all flawed. Every one of us. We all are flawed. And Forrest's church was as well. But he had some good stuff to share, and so I'm going to use it today. The year was 2006 when Forrest began thinking more seriously about his own death. That's when he was told he had what appeared to be inoperable esophageal cancer. How long do I have? He asked the doctor. The doctor's guess was simply months. He decided to wait to tell his congregation until he had clearer news, and that clearer news came 10 days later when a CT scan indicated that the tumor was operable and appeared to be contained in the esophagus. During that 10 days, though, Forrest welcomed the opportunity that he had to absorb the sudden news and ascertain his own reaction to what he'd been preaching on for a long time in his ministry, preaching about death. Here are his own words. He said, "Having spent my entire working life preparing for death's exam, I was curiously eager to sharpen my pencils and prepare for the coming test with a little attendant commotion as possible. In retrospect, the most staggering thing about my reaction is that I cut straight to acceptance. Cut straight to acceptance. I embraced the diagnosis at its grimace and began girding myself to die. No disbelief, no anger, no bargaining. In fact, if anything, for a day or two I walked around in a pink cloud, feeling my death, getting used to it, finding my sea legs in what turned out to be remarkable, gentle waters. Was my theology working? Although Forrest was accepting his death sentence, that didn't mean that he was happy about dying, because he had lots of ongoing business that he had wanted to take care of, a book that he was in the midst of that he wanted to complete, and plans with his loved ones. He realized that he may not be able to complete those plans, but his acceptance abided down in a deeper place. He said that he realized that although he had much ongoing business, he felt that he had no unfinished business. He felt that he'd made peace with himself, his fellows, and his God. An older gentleman that I knew when I was active in First Baptist Church had come back to the church after a life-threatening illness. I greeted him there, and I'd shared with him how good it was to see him back at church. His response was, "I can't die yet. I still owe people money." That man was a friend of my dad's, and they had the same philosophy when it came to money. How many times I heard my dad said, "I don't want to owe anybody anything." Forrest Church was one that also wanted to get his bills paid, but he was not referring to just finances. Although he accepted his death, he realized there were others to think about. He writes, "Mere acceptance, you see, was too easy, too selfish. The network of relationships which binds us and sometimes enables us with each other has its own moral standards that we cannot meet on our own, only together. So I was confronted with a new batch of unfinished business to take care of. Much, not all, I'm sure, but much of that business we together were able to attend to. It was difficult, bracing, humbling, and yes, sobering, but finally healing. A healing that touched from soul to soul. Like many of you, I've witnessed that healing at Life's End. As many of you know, my dad had Alzheimer's. Occasionally, his last days, he would worry that he had not done something he needed to do, or paid someone he owed, or taken care of some business. And sometimes he would even get up and say he needed to go to work to take care of something. And my mama would have to reassure him, know that he'd taken care of everything. Everything was done, that he had done what he needed to do so he could just relax. I think my dad was able to let go on September 25th, 2006, because he knew everything was okay. He had done his best. And as I've shared with you here before, my dad was indeed a very flawed man. But he had done for what for him was his best. And my wonderful son Fred spent that last night with him, telling him how much he had done for him and how he appreciated all he had taught him and how he would do his best to live the kind of life that my dad would want him to live. And I smile when I think of my brother making sure that my daddy knew that he would keep the grass cut and feed the dog and take care of Mama and me. And me singing Amazing Grace one last time while I watched his lips move. All of these were amazing grace, weren't they? Forest Church connects these activities with salvation. He says, such salvation has three dimensions. Integrity, or individual wholeness, comes when we make peace with ourselves. We need to do that. Reconciliation, or shared wholeness, comes when we make peace with our neighbors, especially our loved ones. Redemption, in the largest sense, comes when we make peace with life and death, with being itself, with God. Now, when Forest Church refers to God, he's not referring to some puppet master pulling every string above this tiny globe as if the universe turned on how we behave here. Instead, his God is the very ground of our being, that which is greater than all, yet present in each. Now, Forrest was very lucky in a way that he had a diagnosis which prompted him to have the conversations that are so important for us to have with our loved ones. We all need to do this to have some healing. And also, we all need to let them know about our wishes, what they are regarding our dying. Even if we've done those advanced directives and living wills, have we talked to our loved ones about these things so they understand? By the way, if you have one of those, put it so it can easily be found. A copy of mine is in an envelope with a magnet on the refrigerator. I won't tell you why I've done that, but you can ask me after the service and I'll tell you. During the days after his initial diagnosis, Forrest says his theological mantras kept looming through his brain, the different mantras he had taught and that he said to himself. I'm going to share those with you, and I don't have a PowerPoint so you can see them, but I will post this sermon later and you can read them or watch the video. So here are those concepts. Religion is our human response to the dual reality of being alive and having to die. We are more alike in our ignorance than we differ in our knowledge. God is not God's name. God is our name for that which is greater than all and yet present in each. Whether or not there is life after death, surely there is love after death. The one thing that can never be taken from us, even by death, is the love that we give away before we die. The purpose of life is to live in such a way that our lives will prove worth dying for. Forrest states that even now these propositions stand unchallenged at the heart of his faith. Yet he says the consolation they offered was more intellectual, not emotional. He said his soul needed something more bracing for him to think about day to day. So he turned to the mantra that has guided his life shortly since 9/11. Want what you have, do what you can, be who you are. And that's the primary mantra that I have adopted as well. Want what you have, do what you can, be who you are. Of course, Forrest unpacks and explains and shares about all of these mantras and his writings. And perhaps this sermon is more like a trailer for a film to stimulate you to read his works. I do not have time to unpack all those mantras in this sermon. Be a good sermon series, I guess, wouldn't it? Instead, I'll move on to the rest of the story. As it turns out, the surgery in 2006 was a success. It took about 3 months of recuperation and some time for Forrest to get his voice back, but he did, having passed the test and gleaned valuable information with his own passage through the valley of the shadow of death. He returned to his preaching, his research and his writings, including some exciting books on the early history of our country. Greg and I heard him talk about one of those books at a General Assembly. He had been given a new lease on life and new appreciation for every day that he had. I'm aware of those in our congregation who've had similar bouts with cancer or other illnesses that gained that same new lease and appreciation for each day of life. Although I've had no close calls in my adult life, I'm truly blessed to have been granted with the amazing grace to recognize the gift that each day brings. Perhaps it was because I grew up with whispers of folks marveling that the doctors and the good Lord had saved me from what most thought was a life-ending head injury when I was just 3.5. In any case, I do not take this gift of life for granted. The entire title of Church's book is Love and Death, My Journey Through the Valley of the Shadow. Forrest is referring to that famous passage from Psalm 23. This psalm is attributed to King David, another flawed and complex man who faced death many times. Now in his psalm, David refers to what I might call divine love, and he refers to this as Lord. David has a little different perspective and theology of mine, but I can take his words, have an understanding of what he means, and lift them up. This psalm is often used to help folks relax within that divine love, called by many names, and let go. In my work attending those UUs who've been close to death, I've had no requests for this psalm. But as I did my chaplaincy field work at Northside Hospital in Atlanta, this was the passage that I was most often called upon to read by family members and by those lying and dying in those hospital beds. In the traditional King James Version, which I knew the best, it is, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Forrest returned to that valley early in 2008. And on February 4th, 2008, he sent a letter to the members and friends at his church that his cancer had returned with a vengeance, and this time, his time was remaining would be months, not years. On receiving the letter, a longtime parishioner who had known her full share of death wrote to Forrest of her heartache. "My heart has been broken again," Camille wrote. "And for that, I am overwhelmingly thankful. Without love, this would not be possible." We will all enter that valley one day. Indeed, we all have a death sentence. We're born with one. And then what? And then what? Here's how Forrest Church responds to that question. After death, our bodies may be resurrected. Our souls may transmigrate or become part of the heavenly plethora. We may join our loved ones in heaven, or we may return to the constituent parts of our being, to the earth from which it came, and rest in eternal peace. About life after death, no one knows. But about this we surely know. There is love after death. Not only do our finest actions invest life with meaning and purpose, but they also live on after us. The love that we have given to others is the one thing death can't kill. Forrest tells his readers goodbye at the end of his last chapter. He writes, I bid you farewell. Go forth into this fragile, blessed body we share with laughter and tears at the ready. Love, work, and serve to a fare thee well. And then, when your own time comes, let go. Let go. For dear life, let go. May it be so for us all. Amen.